I'm so good at my job, guys. All right. So let's see. Share my screen again. Okay. So yes, with that one, when you're looking at the square root of I squared would be the same thing as the square root of -1 squared. And so that just becomes -1. Does that make sense? Broken down.
Okay. Yep.
Wait, Miss Thompson.
What's up, Liz?
Why is it D? Can you just go over it really quickly again? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step that I did was I eliminated A and B right away because I know that there has to be an I term in my answer.
They don't cancel, Liz.
Because the reason when I see the I term, it looks a lot more intimidating, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if instead I think of it as an X term, if I were to factor this out, I would end up with X squared, something with, if I do this, with an X term and then a number term, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, in this case, my X squared is I squared, which is the square root of -1 squared, which means it just becomes a number again. But this one is still an I. So I know that I have to have an I in my answer. Okay, so knowing that, then my next step, I took notice that with my remaining answers, both of them have 154 I. Mm-hmm. Which means that you know how you do the first terms, then the outer terms, then the inner terms, and the last terms. What this tells me is that I don't need my outer inner step. I just need to look at my first and my last. So I'm going to do 14 times 7 plus -2I times 12I. Okay, so 14 times 7 is 98 plus -24I squared. And remember, again, I squared is just -1, so we have 98 plus -24 times -1. And then that's the same thing as 98 plus 24. So that gets us our 122. So that makes it D.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any other properties of I that we might see on the SAT?
No, not typically. So with a complex number, what you're typically looking for is the two that you basically just saw is if you add or subtract I, then it's just like any other variable. It's just I. Okay. But if you multiply I, if you square it, then the I goes away. Like it becomes the square root of -1 squared. So if it helps you, you can think through the steps, or you can always just have memorized that I squared equals -1. Whichever one helps you more. Okay. Okay, so this one again starts out looking more complicated than it is. But for me, with inequalities, what I like to do first is get everything onto one side. So I'm going to move this around until I have 4 greater than or equal to x squared plus x minus 2. And then 0 is greater than or equal to x squared plus x minus 6. Which means that 0 is greater than or equal to x plus 3 times x minus 2. Does that make sense what I did?
Yes.
So what I did first was I just moved it to one side and then I factored it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want my right side to be less than or equal to 0. If I'm multiplying two things together, if I want the whole thing to equal 0, what has to be true? I don't know if I phrased that correctly.
Yeah,
If
'cause
I have
X
something times something else is equal to 0, what do you know to be true?
One of
that
the numbers being multiplied has to be 0.
Exactly, Andrew. So
Yep.
one of these two terms has to be equal to 0. So the thing that makes them equal to 0 are
is either
-3
or 2,
and 2.
right?
Okay, so I have two answers that involve -3 and 2. So I'm going to cross out the rest of them. So I basically have to figure out, is it a number between -3 and 2, or is it a number outside of them? Which one would you guys like to test first?
C.
Okay, so I'm going to pick a number between -3 and 2, and I'm going to pick the easiest one for me, which is 0. So if I were to plug in 0 for x, I end up getting 3 times -2. And what does that give me?
-6.
Okay, so I get -6. Is -6 less than or equal to 0?
Absolutely.
So that's my correct answer.
Okay. Okay, actually, okay. That makes sense how you solved that one. Okay.
Anybody, any questions? Okay, cool. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so this one is a calculator question, but it's a word problem. So it's really just, do you know what you're looking for in a word problem? So I want y'all to read over it and then tell me how you think you would use your calculator to solve it.
Okay, so I would say, wait, so H is, yeah, okay. Okay. So when maximum height, so is it when t equals 0?
In this case, it is not. So I graphed it on Desmos really quickly. Okay, so here is what this graph looks like. So the maximum height is wherever it's the tallest, right? So we're actually looking for this point up here at the top.
Right.
And so you're using in Leonard, I'm sorry, I don't know your calculator well enough, but you're looking for the maximum. So in the TI-84, you're using second calc or second trace, which takes you to the calc button. And then I think it's number 3 is your maximum.
Yeah, I found it. I think it automatically calculates it for me. I've used this calculator a bit because of physics and delta math, so I know it a bit better now. Which is
Good. I'm glad that's helping out. So you're just looking for the tallest point, which is also called the maximum. So in this case, it's closest to 38 would be our answer.
Wait, that's literally the entire problem? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so as long as you know what you're doing, you can save a lot of time on a lot of these,
Yeah.
essentially. Okay.
Okay, the next one. Ooh, these are fun. I like these. So if x minus 2 is a factor of this problem, then k is equal to. Okay, so x minus 2 being a factor means that you're multiplying it times something else. So I'm going to have x squared plus bx plus c. Okay. Does
Okay.
that make sense where how I knew that it was going to be an x squared in the second one?
Not quite.
Wait,
Okay.
no.
So think about if you have x minus 2 times x plus 4, when we multiply it out, these first two, we get x squared, right?
Right.
Okay, so those are factors of x squared plus 2x minus 8. So since this is a factor of this one, it means that this one times something else will give me that one. So I knew that the first two things, x times x squared, would have
It's x cubed, right? Okay.
I used these letters because I don't know yet what those numbers are. I know that there's probably going to be a coefficient in front of x. I just don't know what it is yet. So I chose B and C just because that's what standard form looks like. But if you want to use an L for Leonard or an A for Andrew, that's your choice, right? So what I can do, though, is start multiplying out. I know I'm going to have x cubed minus 2x squared. So really, I just did these first two first. Okay. And then I have x times bx, which is plus bx squared minus 2bx. And then lastly, we have plus cx minus 2c. Okay, and I know this looks really complicated, but what I do know is that this term here, minus 2c, should be equal to negative 8. So what does that mean c is?
4.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
So now we know that c is equal to 4, okay? So I'm going to go back and plug that in. So I have x cubed minus 2x squared plus bx squared minus 2bx plus 4x minus 8. Okay, so now I know that this one, the minus 2bx plus 4x,
Mhm.
will give me 12x. So what does b equal to then?
6.
Not quite. You also have this 4x. So if you were to write out the equation, you would have negative 2bx plus 4x equals 12x, which is negative 2b plus 4 equals 12. Negative 2b equals 8. So b equals
Divided by 2, right?
by negative 2. So b equals negative
Oh, yeah.
4. Okay, so now I know b equals negative 4. Okay, so I can plug it in to this one here. And I have negative 2x squared minus 4x squared, which is equal to negative 6x squared. So my k is negative 6.
Wait.
Okay. Okay, so this one look a bit more complicated, but I mean, it's okay. It's just essentially just breaking the question down.
Where did I lose you, Liz?
That last step you just did, could you walk through it again, please?
Okay, did you get where I got b equals negative 4?
Yes, I got that.
Okay, so then the box in red, that's the last place where I'm missing a b term. And do you see how those all have x squareds with them?
Oh.
So the k also has an x squared. So then I just plugged in negative
Oh.
4 for the b, and then you get negative 6x squared. So that means that the k is negative 6.
Okay, I see it now. I understand. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next one. Oh, this one's so fun. This is another time saver. Okay. For this function, g defined above, a is a constant and g of 4 equals 8. What is the value of g of negative 4?
Oh, okay.
How would you guys go about solving this problem?
Plug in -4 for x.
Okay. So, Leonard, I'm going to tell you right now, you chose the long way. Are you still going to get the right answer? Absolutely, though. Okay, so if he plugs in negative 4, so we get, or we have to start with 4 first, since we know what it is. So we can plug it in and we get 8 equals a times 4 squared plus 24, which is 8 equals 16.
That's a wonderful 6 right there.
I know. I keep on, my iPad keeps on zooming in while I'm trying to write. Plus 24. Okay, so then we get negative 16 is equal to 16a. So that means that a is equal to negative 1. Okay, so then we go back and we plug it into our equation, negative 1x squared plus 24. And then we plug in negative 4, in which case we end up getting, once we plug it in, we end up getting 8.
Right, because it's -16 plus 24, right?
Yes. Or it's positive 16 plus 24. Or negative 16 plus 24, sorry, yes.
It's negative.
So you end up getting 8 again. Now, what I can tell you guys about this type of problem, what I recognized about it, is do you guys see how this function up here does not have a middle term?
Sure.
So if it doesn't have a middle term, what does this plus 24 do to the equation? Like, so normally we just have x squared, right? And x squared looks like this. Woo.
Right.
I'm not doing very well drawing, but if we have the same function plus 24, it just looks like this. It just moves it up, right?
Right.
So what has happened is that it's still a mirror image about the y-axis. Unless there's something in the middle, unless there's just a plain x term, it means that it's symmetrical. So that means that the values on a table, if we have -1, 0, and 1, all the numbers are sandwiches. So it would go 1, 0, 1.
Does
So
that
if
also
you
mean
have
that the slope is going to be the same?
that the what?
Slope is going to be the same?
Yeah, the slope is going to be the same, but all we have to know is that the y value is going to be the same. So as long as there isn't a middle term, so as long as it's not ax squared plus 7x plus 24, it's this piece that moves it off to the side. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So as long as it's symmetrical about the y-axis, that means that 6 and -6 have the same y value. It means that -4 and 4 have the same y value. So when they told me that +4 equals 8, I knew that -4 equaled 8. Now, did Leonard Sway get the right answer too? Absolutely. But if you remember these little tricks, they'll save you a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. Okay. Yep. Saving time is going to be my friend on the SAT.
Okay, here's the next one. This one's similar to the last one. So the first thing I'm going to say is that ax times bx will give me abx squared. And I want that to be equal to 15x squared. Okay, so what are the possible things that A and B could be equal to?
3 and 5.
3 and 5.
1,
Also 1 and 15 at this point, but they also tell us that A plus B equals 8. So that means that it can
It's
only be 3.
3 and 5.
Okay. Does it have to be 3 and 5, or could it also be 5 and 3?
Be 5 and 3.
It could also be 5 and 3.
Now, this question is intended to trip you up because look at what answer A is.
3 and 5.
But what is the question asking me for?
What are the two possible values for C?
So I know that A is not correct. Okay, I'm looking for the values of C. Okay, so one possible way to do this, we'll do it with 3 and 5 first. So we'll do this one in green. So we have 3x plus 2 times 5x plus 7. And I'm really just looking for this CX term. So to save me time, I'm only going to do this times this and this times this. So I have 21x plus 10x, and that gives me 31x. Now there's only one answer that has 31, so I know that it has to be D. But let's just pretend for funsies that answer C also was 31. So I also have to do it for the second equation with 5 and 3. So we have 5x plus 2 and 3x plus 7. And the same thing, I'm only concerned about these, the inner and outer ones. So I have 35x plus 6x, which gives me 41x. So that confirms that D is my right answer. Does that
Okay.
one make sense?
yes.
Yep.
I think the biggest thing about that problem that's meant to trip you up is the fact that you get 3 and 5, and then 3 and 5 is the first answer, and you're like, oh, yep, that's it. But it's not. So just make sure you're double checking what the question is asking you for. Super straightforward. We just have to factor. So I have t plus 2 and t minus 2 equals 0. And that means that I have -2 and 2 as answers, but it only wants the one where t is greater than 0. So 2 is the answer.
Yep. Okay.
The biggest problem is if you don't box in that 2, I think for SAT, you don't even get partial credit. I could be wrong, but.
Wow.
Yep. All right, this one, very similar to the last one about word problems. It's more just making sure that you know what it's asking. So go ahead and read through the problem first, and then tell me what you think it's asking for, like in terms of not just the word problem, but generically on any graph. What feature on a graph is it describing?
I could be wrong, but is it asking for the x-intercept?
That is exactly what it's looking for. That's it. So it helps me when I think of a picture. So I know that the shape of my graph is going to look something like this. And it's asking me for this x-intercept because that's where it hits the ground.
Right.
So that's it. So, and is it asking, and since it's asking for the x coordinate of that point. So you can use your graphing calculator to just figure out what the value is there. I didn't do this one. -4.9 t plus We'll use X.
Oh, what's squared? Okay, what's squared?
And it's 5.102, so about 5 seconds. So it would be D. Okay, so this one, I can talk about why it is, but really I think you should be able to figure it out with process of elimination. So yeah. Okay, based off of the fact that P of 3 is -2, which of the following must be true about P of X?
Okay.
In this case, I think it's the most helpful to think about what you know is definitely not true first.
Okay, so wait, no. Yeah.
So start by looking at answer choice C. If X plus 2 is a factor, what does that mean?
That means
Can
five.
be divided by it?
Yes, go ahead, Andrew.
Would that mean that 5 is a factor of 3? Or wait, no, 0 is a factor of 3.
Yeah, so it would mean that this, gosh, every time. I can't put my hand down. I have to remember that. It means that -2, 0 is a point on the graph, but they just told me up here that -2, 3 is a point on the graph. So I know that C cannot be true.
Oh, okay.
Okay. When they wrote X minus 2 is a factor, do I know anything about X minus 2?
Not really.
Nope. Do I know anything about X minus 5?
Nope.
D is your correct answer. Now, if you want me to talk about why it is, a remainder in this case, when we're talking about polynomials, when we're talking about quadratics, a remainder is a vertical shift in this case. So if we were to have X minus 3, then it would be, if X minus 3 is a factor, then it is 3, 0. Okay, right? But they were telling me that when they plug in 3, they get -2. So that means that it was shifted down 2. So that just means that it was a remainder when it was divided. I know that's like not something we talk about a lot because you wouldn't really need to use it very much. So that's why I just stick with the process of elimination for A, B, and C.
Okay.
There are I don't know if I can come up with an example on the top of my head, but the best way to see it is when you have an equation. Let me see if I can Google an example real quick. Okay, so for this one, an example could be, let's do X minus 2 and x minus 3, I guess. I don't I don't know how to show you guys. Like it's just in my head. Can you take my word for it for now? Is that okay? Is that acceptable?
Yep.
If you want to see it later, I can try to come up with an example that will show it to you, but I can't think of an example that does it. Yeah, that's just the best way to describe it. Do you guys remember doing synthetic division in school where you would have the terms on the side were you would have something like x squared plus 5x plus 3, and you would have 1, 5, and 3, and you wanted to see if it was divisible by x minus 3, and so you would have 3 in the box over here. Do you guys remember doing that?
Yeah, we
And it
did
would
it.
be break down the first
algebra
one,
two.
and you'd have 1, and then you'd have 3, and then you'd have 2, and then you'd have 6, and then you had a remainder.
I don't particularly remember how to do it, but we did it like in
This is
algebra
basically the
2.
same thing, except the example I just came up with gave you a remainder of -3 instead of -2. My bad.
Right.
But that is the concept, is that the remainder is over here, and that's what that means. I mean, yeah. Okay. I wish I was better at coming up with numbers in my head. Okay. Next. Sorry. Got distracted. Okay. I'll scroll back up to the picture. I'm just going to scroll down to the problem first. Which of the following is an equivalent form of the equation of the graph shown in the xy plane above? From which of the coordinates of vertex A can be identified as constants in the equation? So to me, in order to do this question the fastest, I noted that the point that they gave me was A.
Mhm.
And they told me in the problem, and I can see it in the picture, that this is my vertex. Okay, so looking at these problems, at these equations, which one is in vertex form?
D?
D is in vertex form, that's right. And so I'm going to double check that this is the vertex. So this should give me the y coordinate of my vertex, and this should give me my
Yes,
x
coordinate.
coordinate. Okay, so I have +1, -16, and that's about where my dot is. So I know that those are the same. Now,
Okay.
could you multiply out all of these answers?
I mean, sure.
But that is a huge waste of your time, though, too. Right?
Yeah.
So recognizing that the only thing they gave me was vertex A, so I know I'm looking for something in vertex form. The only one that was in vertex form was D, and then I just double checked that the vertex was correct. So that was it. Yep. And that's the end of the problems, too. The end.
All right.
Congratulations. Okay, anybody have any other questions? Okay, so these first questions, so this first one talks about where the x and y coordinates of the vertex appear as constants or coefficients. And so the only one that is in vertex form is choice C. Oftentimes they will put this on the test so that you waste your time trying to graph things, etc. But often they'll only have one equation that is in vertex form. So this one up here is in factored form. That tells you about your roots or your x-intercepts. Standard form, which is the ax squared plus bx plus c, that one tells you about your y-intercept, and then your a can also tell you if it's positive, then it's concave up, and if it's negative, then it's concave down. But vertex form tells you your vertex. The opposite of this is your x-coordinate, so in this case, it's 3. And then this is your y-coordinate, so it's -2. So we know our vertex is at 3, -2 for that one. Okay. Let's see. Next, we have this one. I think I started explaining this one at the beginning, but I just want to make sure that I go through it all again, just in case I missed something there. So first and foremost, I can eliminate choice A and B, because if I think of these as x terms, when you factor it out, you have x squared plus x plus a number. In this case, our x is an I plus a number, and we have x squared that becomes a number. So we know that our answer will be a number plus something I. So A and B don't have I terms, so I can eliminate them. Moving on from that, I know that since 154 is the same number in both, I only need to look at my 2 number components. So I get that by doing 14 times 7 plus -2i times 12i. So we end up with 98 plus -24 I squared. I squared is the same thing as -1. So -24 times -1 is just 24. So 98 plus 24 is equal to 122. So I know that D is the correct answer.